Back here on CBS Sports HQ, the playoff picture is slowly coming into focus. Right now we're looking at the AFC, where the Chiefs and the Bills, the only two teams that have certainly clinched a playoff spot so far. The other division leaders, the Steelers, sitting at 10-3. Then we have the Texans. The wild card belongs to the Ravens, Broncos, and the Chargers. On the outside looking in, we still have the Colts, the Dolphins, and Haley, we're still talking about the Bengals potentially being in it.
I don't want to talk about the Bengals, Jacqueline, after what happened earlier this week. We move along because, as you can see on the right side of your screen, the Dallas Cowboys, America's team, somehow, some way, still in the hunt.
That's crazy.
I know, it's a mess. I'm just kidding. We're not actually going to talk about that. But we do know that the Lions and the Eagles have both clinched their spot when it comes to the NFC playoff picture. You guys just had a great conversation about the Seahawks. The Bucs are also in right now, too. But the Vikings at 11-2 have looked pretty good this year. Pete's pick, the Green Bay Packers, sitting there at 6, and the Commanders, just like everyone imagined, are right now in the postseason. So let's continue our conversation when it comes to the NFL playoff picture. We're going to talk odds and when they're going to get in and whatnot. So let's start with that wild, wild west, as we were discussing. We're going to talk about the Rams. It's going to stick. Everyone's going to call it that by the end of the football season. But when it comes to the Rams, it's kind of an interesting team. Never count out the heart of a champion, and that champion is Matt Stafford. That's actually Puka Nacua. Matt's over here. But regardless, he's got this team really humming right now. So, Leger, when you look at what they've done, especially with the division picture as Pete and Jacqueline just laid out, how confident are you that the Rams can get in?
I'm very confident, and Pete, this is the one team in the NFC that nobody wants to play in the playoffs. They are praying that the Rams don't get in because of Sean McVay, who is the best play caller in all of football. That offense is so explosive. Pete, I think people forgot earlier in the year the offensive line was beat up. 4 out of the 5 starting spots weren't there. They're back now. Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, they're back right now, and the Bills found out the hard way that is a tough team to deal with on the offensive side of the ball. They can put up points when everybody is healthy and is in place. Big game this Thursday versus the 49ers. The 49ers have owned them the last few years, and they essentially need this game to stay in the playoffs. To me, Pete, whoever loses that game between the 49ers and Rams, they're out of the playoff contention. This is a must-win for the LA Rams. They do have a date with the Seahawks. You see it in Week 18. But I guarantee you right now, nobody in the NFC wants this team to get into the playoffs.
Well, their defense isn't great. Let's be real. And they had six rookies play 15 or more snaps, and 5 of them played over 30 snaps. That's a lot of rookies on the field at one point, and you get a lot of busts in that secondary. The corners aren't great. The safeties are young. And so I think from that standpoint, I agree with you. They're going to score on anybody because McVay is such a good play caller. Stafford's such a good quarterback. The offensive line, the tackles were outstanding last week, and they can have receivers who can catch the ball. But can they stop people? That's my big concern with them.
I did just want to throw this in from our awesome research team. Doug Clausen tweeted this out. He said Matt Stafford is 11-5 with 4,381 passing yards, 35 touchdowns, and just 7 interceptions over the last 2 seasons when Kyren Williams, Cooper Kupp, and Puka Nacua all played. So that kind of sounds like
tough to contend with, man.
Can any of them cover on the back end? Because they might need them.
I didn't really help.
It's always a first to 50, right? It's the 51st wins.
But they're going to be fun to watch in the postseason, that's for sure.
And I bet there's a lot of folks in those comments saying he is a Hall of Famer, C, or he's not a Hall of Famer, C. That's always the conversation there with Matt Stafford. Let's talk about a team in a very different situation. Oh boy, the Atlanta Falcons here. Kirk Cousins has just kind of looked like a shell of himself. They've rattled off, what, 4 straight losses, and during that span, not 1 touchdown to 8 interceptions. Pete, it's just a shake your head type of moment when you look at what's happening with the Falcons right now. They lose the division. As of right now, it could change to the Bucs too.
Yeah, and look, there's an outcry to make the change at quarterback and go to Michael Penix. I don't know if you do that in this scenario, but it can't be any worse.
Exactly.
That's the thing, because Kirk Cousins has been awful. And I was one last
all week. Do you put in Michael Penix?
Yeah, and I was there last week saying I thought Kirk Cousins would come out of it against his former team, and he did not. And he's struggling in the worst way. And it's compounded by the fact that the secondary can't cover anybody. And when your secondary has problems, then you're going to try and play a fast-paced game, and you can't do that because he's not good enough. So I think, ultimately they will make a change at some point. Do they wait too long to make the change? That's the question.
And that's the thing, right? They had an opportunity with a 3-game lead in this division while Kirk Cousins was struggling on a 3-game stretch. And you talked about it, Pete. Would he get out of that funk versus his old team? Looked really good in the first drive, but they had him under center, which Kirk Cousins is one of the best play-action pass quarterbacks in the league. He looked, strategical in that first and surgical that first drive. They marched down the field and scored easily. But after that, it was the decision-making, just bad. He pump fakes the ball and still throws it, knowing that the guy was underneath, Josh Metellus, and you throw an easy interception. I just don't understand it. Jacqueline, I already said last week that I thought that they should go to Michael Penix Jr.
You did say that last week.
What is the reason of taking him in the top 10? Right, you took him that high because, one, you didn't know if Kirk was going to actually be truly healthy, and he was a succession plan. Well, this is an opportunity, right? You have games coming up against the Raiders and the Giants. So it's not like you're throwing them in a buzzsaw versus the Denver Broncos defense or the Minnesota Vikings defense. You're throwing them in there against defenses where he can have success, and you have the playmakers on offense. I really love how Zach Robinson ran the ball with Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. He can lean on the run game. For me, if you're Raheem Morris, you have to know the temperature of your team, right? If things are starting to turn in that locker room, you got to go with the young guy because you guys are still in the thick of this thing. One more game, and this could be over.
Is this the end of Kirk Cousins as a starting quarterback?
So that's what I was going to ask. Do you remember at the beginning of football season when you and I had that conversation at the desk, and I said, I think Baker Mayfield's going to have the better season, and you said, I think Kirk Cousins is going to have the better season. And now here we are.
That was based on him being healthy.
Sure. But as you've seen kind of how those two guys specifically play, is this what we expected? Because we had that argument.
Yeah, and Pete, we've talked about it before. When a player goes down, it goes down quickly. It goes downhill quick.
Yeah.
And you hate for this to be the issue with Kirk Cousins. Baker Mayfield has played amazing this year. Now, he has turned it over a little bit too much, but there's also been some deficiencies on offense. I think he's forcing the football down the field. But Kirk Cousins, you talked about it, Jacqueline, he's been a shell of himself, right? Last 4 games, 8 interceptions, no touchdowns. That's not winning football at all. And besides the 2 Tampa Bay games where he actually played really well, he's not played well this season. So I hope this isn't the end of Kirk Cochains, but you just never know with an injury like that at that age, coming off the Achilles, will he ever be healthy again?
We talked about Caleb Williams going to a great situation as a rookie. It hadn't worked out that way. We all talked about Kirk Cousins going into a fantastic situation with the offensive line being what it is. It's a good offensive line with those skill players. Kyle Pitts, is he invisible? What does he do? He does nothing.
Been waiting for years.
Robinson, it hadn't worked out in large part because of Kirk Cousins. He's not playing very well.
Yeah, we always kept saying they're just a quarterback away. They're a quarterback away, and to your point, now we're talking about potentially replacing him with a rookie in Week 15, which is crazy.
Yeah, and if we continue the bad quarterback play, actually our next topic is the Cardinals, and Kyler Murray has also not been very good. The touchdown to interception ratio doesn't look good. Tied for the most interception in his 3-game span in his career. So again, we continue to talk about that division and the race and what it looks like. It feels like if you're Kyler Murray, Pete, you are going to be the driver to get things on track. Is that what you've seen out of Arizona this year? And what needs to change for them to get into the postseason?
I think the lack of true talent on the defense has caught up with them. And they play hard, they play tough, they play physical, and they get after it. But they're not that talented on the defensive side of the ball. So now you're seeing them get hit by big plays in the run game, and they're just not as good as they were early in the season. And so I think it puts more pressure on Kyler Murray. You saw the opening drive last week. Bing, bing, bing. He went down the field, hit a touchdown. I go, okay, this is going to be a Kyler Murray game. And then all of a sudden it settled in, and he struggled. He threw some really bad passes, bad decision-making, and he just didn't look. It's been a couple games now. He just hasn't looked comfortable. And I think he might be pressing with the idea that his defense isn't good enough because they don't have a lot of talent on that side of the ball.
Yeah, Pete, we talked about this. This is a gritty team. We thought they were a year away, right? And I think that's starting to come to fruition right now because of the lack of talent, more specifically on the defensive side. They really don't have anybody that can get after the quarterback. And in this league, you got to have somebody up front that can affect the quarterback, and they don't have that right now. But when it comes to Kyler Murray, the decision-making has not been good the last 2 weeks. The Minnesota Viking game, 2 awful interceptions, and they were in the game. Matter of fact, they were up in that game. They were about to pull off the upset, and he had 2 late fourth-quarter interceptions that kind of changed that game, and Minnesota won. Last week, it was the beginning of the game versus the Seattle Seahawks. God-awful. Ernest Jones is right there in zone coverage. He stares his receiver down on the in-breaking. Easy interception, and then he's late throwing the ball to the left, and Kobe Bryant just undercuts it and gets the interception. So it's the playmaking. I do believe you're right, Pete. It's because he's pressing, because he knows on that other side of the ball, we don't have the horses that we need to win games. So I have to keep pace with the other team, but you have to take care of the football. If you don't take care of the football, you have no chance to win games.
You know what else they're missing? And it's hard to believe we're going to say this when you draft a receiver as high as they did, and he's a good player. They don't have speed. It shows up. Harrison isn't a speed
No, he's not.
burner.
He's like a true
good
X-receiver.
Physical player. He can catch the ball, make the 50-50 catches, give you your slants and everything. But they don't have speed, so everybody kind of sits on everything. And McBride's good. Harrison's good. Their next step is to go find a real true burner and add him into that offense.
All right, let's talk about another team that's in the race, still technically in that division, because the Cardinals are still technically alive, and so are the 49ers, despite all of the injuries.
Wild.
I know, it is wild. And Leger, you talked about it. You said it was a must-win for the Rams,
sure.
but it also feels like a must-win, of course, for the 49ers, for both of them. And we saw them showing maybe a little bit of life against the Bears, but I don't really know. Do you think the Bears are just that bad, or is this team starting to still figure it out despite the injuries?
It was a combination of the 49ers getting healthier at the right time, with Jawan Jennings coming back, George Kittle removed another week, being healthy. Also, Brock Purdy, remember, he had the shoulder injury, another week removed from that. So their offense was as healthy as it's been all year long, and we saw it pay dividends on the field. Also, the Bears were bad, right? When you move and make your running back coach the offensive coordinator, then switch and make him the head coach, that's a lot on his plate. And we saw the offense struggle for Chicago because of that. I love what I saw from the 49ers defense. Now, again, we have to put an asterisk on it because the Bears offense was abysmal in that game, and I think it's because Thomas Brown had too much on his plate. When you have Gross Matos get 3 sacks, right? Leonard Floyd come up big, and you don't have, Nick Bosa on the outside. That pays well, and that pays dividends going down the stretch because you're going to need to have that depth on defensive line to get after quarterbacks. You talked about it, Jacqueline. This is a must-win for the 49ers and the Rams. Whoever loses this game, their playoff aspirations, it's over. Right now, historically, the 49ers have owned the Rams at Levi Stadium, so that'll be interesting to see this game. But I love what I saw from the offense. Now, Isaac Guerrero will see how healthy he is because you talk about speed. He has it at the running back position, but he's been off the shelf in front of my eyes. Patrick Taylor came in and ran well, but he's not Guerrero when you talk about the home run speed that Isaac Guerrero has.
He'll be fine in that offense.
If they don't have him, it'll be interesting to see this game versus the Rams.
Here's the thing about the 49ers. They're a proud franchise. They went into the season thinking they were a Super Bowl team. They had so many injuries, but there's still guys getting back, like you said. Hafunga come back at safety, and now you have Mustafa and Hafunga, and both those guys will knock your blocks off, and they're good back there. So this is Brock Purdy's moment. Okay, everybody said pay him. We saw last week, he was really good last week. Now go down a 4-game stretch, take the team onto your right arm. This is your moment to show everybody what you are and what you can be, and then you're going to get the mega contract and you're going to be the franchise quarterback. 4 weeks to prove it. I believe he is. He showed it last week. This is his moment, though.
No pressure, Brock Purdy.
Yeah, well, for my sake, I hope they don't make it, but that's just I'm rooting for a different NFC team to find our way in because they've been dealt with injuries, but that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about the AFC, guys. When it comes to the Colts, and I kind of was thinking about this earlier when you were talking about maybe a potential quarterback change in Atlanta. Obviously, the Colts did that midseason when it came to Anthony Richardson. They're coming off that bye, and now they are just one spot away from getting into the postseason. Pete, when you think about what the Colts have just been over the last few years between the coaching changes and now the QB changes, for them to be right here in the hunt at 6-7, 1 game back or so from the Chargers in that 7th spot, like, how successful has this year already been for the Colts, or has it been successful?
It won't be successful until they make the postseason, which is this week, by the way. This is a playoff game for them. They play the Broncos. They both come off a bye, so there's no advantage for either team. Go out and beat the Broncos, and then all of a sudden you sit there and you say, you know what? The move to sit down Anthony Richardson was the right one. He's improved, and it was the right one, by the way, in large part because he wasn't putting the work in. That was the word out of Indianapolis was he had to learn how to be a professional quarterback, and he's learned how to be a professional quarterback. He's better, but this is the playoffs for them. Go to Denver, beat the Broncos, then you get the Titans at home, the Giants, and the Jaguars. You're probably in the playoffs. Not only that, there's a chance you could win the division because, you look at the Texans, they're right there, a couple losses here, and they could win the division. So this is a playoff for them. If they lose this week, they're in big trouble. They win this week, they have a real chance to make the playoffs.
It goes up to 55% if they win this game over Denver, according to the NFL's numbers. So
without a doubt, you talked about it, right? Because if they beat Denver, Denver drops a game, and they still have games, if I'm not mistaken, against the Chiefs and the Chargers, right? So they're probably going to lose one of those 2 games. So this is a massive spot for Anthony Richardson, right? You get to prove all the doubters wrong now. Don't go out there and try to play outside yourself. Play within the offense. Now, we saw him look really good in the second half versus Jets, right? He was very, efficient throwing the football. But last week or 2 weeks ago versus the Patriots, didn't look good throwing the football at all. 2 bad interceptions. But he still was able to put the team on his back when they needed him in a late drive. And then also that gutsy call by his head coach, Shane Steichen, to go for 2 instead of the extra point to end the game in regulation and not go into overtime. This is a massive game for Anthony Richardson and a must-win for the Colts.
All right, another team at 6-7 on the outside looking in, the Miami Dolphins. They've won 4 of the past 5. Their playoff chances go up from 14 to 27% if they win in this coming week. Leger, how do you feel about the Dolphins when you think about how Tua's been playing and their outlook in the remaining schedule?
I mean, they got a gauntlet of a schedule, right? They got to go to the Texans. They play the 49ers. And we know,
Cold.
We know the connotation with them in cold weather. They got to go at the Browns and at the Jets. Tua Tagovailoa has played really well. He's played at an MVP level since coming back from the head injury. When you look at it, it's been Miami's defense and their lack of run game that has been such a question mark for me. Like Mike McDaniels is an ex-run game coordinator, and it's like he forgot that, Pete. They don't run the ball well at all. They literally have put everything on Tua's left arm, right? And he's actually been able to do it even last week versus Jets when their defense couldn't stop the Jets offense. Tua was able to answer those scores back to back, and then in the overtime was surgical with those 2 screen passes. Then he finds, his tight end on an over route for a touchdown to win in overtime. But the lack of the defense and the lack of the run game really concern me for the Miami Dolphins. I just think they've dug a hole that's too deep to really come out of at this point.
Yeah, but if they run the table, they have a shot. I mean, if they run the table. But again, that schedule's not, when you look at it, if they go to Houston this week and win,
it's this week.
Then they got the 49ers at home, winnable. Then you got those 2 games. Yeah, they're going to be in the cold, but you got to show something in the cold, and those are winnable games. That's against the Jets and
Jameis gets hot now,
and against the Browns.
Jameis loves this
gets hot now.
They're winnable games. If Miami can win this, their season's going to come down to this week. Win this week, and you have a legitimate chance to make a run.
There you go, Miami. That's the recipe. Win and you're in. All right, guys. We love having conversations with y'all. For our viewers at home, you can have more conversation when it comes to the Pushing the Pile podcast. By the way, if you like beef, our guy Leger Douzable knows a thing or 2 about beef. Check out his Instagram for all of his awesome cooking videos.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm bringing up the beef is because on the latest episode, Leger Douzable popped on to the Pushing the Pile podcast to talk about NFL beef. So you got to listen in to hear the story.